like to begin this message this morning by inviting all of us to take a few deep breaths. The anxiety and the worry and the fear is thick everywhere, at our dinner tables, in our workplaces, even in the checkout line at the grocery store. Everyone seems to feel just a little bit on edge. And I think a lot of us are feeling wary of other people. We're feeling weary of the strangers we encounter. We don't know who to trust. We don't know what is safe to say and what we shouldn't say. Sometimes I don't even know if I'm safe, period. We've experienced or are experiencing, I think, and have been experiencing for a long time, the breakdown of this assumption that those existing with and among us in American society are reasonable people who, like we are committed to a basic level of civic engagement, and that they contain within themselves a desire for greater good. That feels uncertain. It's not a given, which I know for me, it once was. The essence of public life feels threatened with collapse. This is likely the most critical election of our lifetimes. Of course, we are all feeling stressed out. Folks, Unitarian Universalists tend to get a little nervous and a little cagey when it comes to discussing politics in the pulpit. We understand and we believe in the separation of church and state. We also recognize and we value our tax-exempt status, and we don't want to break the rules and lose it. So I want to put everyone at ease. These are the rules. Churches and other houses of faith cannot endorse or oppose any candidate running for government office. And this goes from the presidency all the way down to the town select board. Never mind that evangelical churches across the United States are literally preaching vote Trump and will never face any penalties or consequences. We are still trying to follow the rules. Religious institutions, however, are permitted to discuss political issues as they relate to our religious values. For many of us, our politics are inextricable from our religious beliefs. I encourage you to vote your values as Unitarian Universalists, values of justice, equity, transformation, plurality, interdependence, and generosity. Each of our values are on the ballot this election, and you don't need me to tell you who to vote for. UUs love democracy. We've always loved democracy. We believe in protecting and upholding the democratic process in our country and in our UU spaces. The democratic principle is interwoven in much of what we do here. It influences how we determine who our board members are and how the board functions. It influences how our budget is determined and approved, and even how we call a minister. In her sermon on conscience and democracy, Reverend Leanne Washington preaches, "The democratic process requires participation. It requires us to be informed, to show up for the discussion at the meeting, and cast our vote. With every right, with every freedom, comes responsibility. Let us not abdicate our responsibility." Now, civics is defined as individual and collective actions that identify and address issues of public concern. Civics pulls us beyond our own self-interests and urges us to consider the greater good. Voting is an act of civic engagement. Putting away your cart at the grocery store is an act of civic engagement. Volunteering at the food bank, attending school board meetings, obeying traffic laws, all are acts of civic engagement. Unfortunately, it seems like there are many Americans today who don't understand what civic engagement is and why it's important. Many Americans today, and I blame capitalism, don't even understand the importance of community. Those who maintain a commitment to civic responsibility recognize the magnitudinous importance of public life. Public life, in the words of Parker J. Palmer, is our life among strangers. Strangers with whom our lot is cast, with whom we are interdependent, whether we like it or not. Public life can be threatened and is threatened in two directions. From the direction of authoritarian tribalism, in which cultures and people are pitted against each other and society devolves into these kind of radical sects where anyone outside of your sect is dangerous and violent and perhaps not even human. And then public life is threatened from the direction of global capitalism, in which all nations are homogenized and tied together through commerce, and all people are reduced to the status of consumer and valued in accordance to their level of consumption. Both threats are present now, and both are threatening the continued existence of public life. Back in 2008, when John McCain was running against Barack Obama for the presidency, people noticed something about the late Arizona senator's remarks. Often, when McCain was talking about his political opponents, he would refer to them as friends, because many of them were his friends. They were actually his friends. And when John McCain died, I think it felt for many of us that an era of civil bipartisanism died with him. I admired John McCain throughout his life because of his unflagging respect for people with beliefs that were different from his own. And to his credit, I recall that McCain did a lot to dispel racist rhetoric during that 2008 election. I don't recall him ever using racist fear-mongering to his advantage. Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota and Harris's vice presidential running mate, employs a similar but quite different tactic. Often, Walz will refer to the people he or you or I might disagree with as neighbors. Neighbors, not friends. When you call someone you disagree with a neighbor, it says, listen, man, you and I live in the same place and we send our kids to the same school and we weather the same storms together. We might as well try to get along. We don't have to be friends, but we are neighbors. I live in a very small, very rural Iowa town. I know most of my neighbors disagree strongly with my politics. I disagree with theirs. But when the derecho of 2020 left us without power for nearly 2 weeks, our neighbors on one side of the street plugged us into their generator, and they saved all the food in our deep freezer and our refrigerator, and we were able to run our cell phones and power the things that we needed to power. Our neighbor across the street, with whom we know we share zero ideological crossover, cares for the neighborhood's feral cats in such a loving and tender way that we can't help but appreciate him. He's also a friend of our personal cat, Banana, and whenever we would meet each other in the street, he would talk about what a beautiful cat he thinks our cat is. And also once, I didn't write this down, but he drives a semi and he once ran over our mailbox, just ran it right over in the middle of the night. And I woke up in the morning and our mailbox was like shattered and on the ground. And it was Dick who had run over our mailbox, and we went across the street and we told him, he didn't know he had done it. He didn't recognize it. We were like, hey, you decimated our mailbox. And he felt terrible and he fixed it. He built us a new mailbox. I've told you about how the pride flag that we hang on our porch gets vandalized a lot or outright stolen. It's been outright stolen. And the neighbor on the other side of us who has his own pride flags, I would call them pride flags, but they're different than our pride flags, but they're pride flags, I would say. He was dismayed and so concerned. And I remember that he reoriented his home security camera with a view of our flagpole. For as long as we live there, our lot is cast with our neighbors. Their politics might devastate and baffle me, and they are still my neighbors. I will always do what I can to help my neighbors, and they have done what they can to help me. My values demand that I care for my neighbor. Values that include the inherent worthiness of every person and the undeniable fact of our interdependence. There's a parable that you're probably familiar with. When the Pharisees are meeting with Jesus in the town square and they ask him, what is the greatest law? And he says, to love your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And who is our neighbor? The Pharisees ask him. And so Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And we're all familiar with this story. There is a man who on the road to Judea, I believe, is beaten by robbers, and they steal his things and they tear his clothes and they leave him for dead in a ditch. And this man is lying, dying on this road. And a priest passes him by and doesn't do anything to help him. And then a Levite passes him by, and a Levite was sort of like an assistant to a priest. And I think the Levite crosses the road and pretends he doesn't even see the guy. And then a Good Samaritan comes by, and Jesus was pretty smart. He knew what he was doing. Samaritans were a community, a sect, a culture of people that were pretty reviled by the folks in the circle of Jesus, whom he was preaching to. Well, the Good Samaritan comes along and he sees the dying man and he picks him up and he puts him on the back of his own donkey and he takes him to an inn and he pays the innkeeper and he bandages the man's wounds and he saves his life. And then he returns days later to pay off any remaining debts that the man who is recovering has incurred. And so at the end of this parable, Jesus asks those who are listening, who was the neighbor to the injured man? And the crowd answers, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus commands, go and do likewise. I think a lot about the other figures in this story, the two men, the priest and the Levite, who passed by the dying man. And I wonder if they were afraid. I wonder if it was fear that kept them from helping. I admit that I am sometimes afraid of my neighbors. I am aware of my difference and the fact that I'm a queer person with a queer partner living in a small rural town, and I'm by all accounts an outsider. And sometimes I'm afraid. And I think that when we hear the story of the Good Samaritan, we all think of ourselves like we are the Good Samaritan, right? We think we're the one who would stop and who would help the dying man. And sometimes I got to tell you, I think we're the priest or the Levite. I think sometimes our fear keeps us from helping, from engaging. I remember once last summer, my partner and I were taking a walk kind of at dusk. It was like 9 o'clock, and there was a kitten in a tree. And I probably told this story because it just so indicative of the world today. And we were looking at this tree and we couldn't climb it. And I looked at the house near the tree and I said, I bet they have a ladder. I'm going to knock on their door. And Skylar said, oh, Emma, please don't knock on that door. What if they shoot us? Because that was happening. You laugh, but it happens. It happens. Fearful people hurt people all the time. And I said to Skylar, oh my God, honestly, if that's how I die, knocking on someone's door to save a kitten from a tree, well, isn't that stupid? And you tell everybody that is what happened to me, but I'm knocking on that door. And I knocked on the door and a man answered. And I said, there's a cat in a tree. Do you have a ladder? And he said, I don't have a ladder. And I thought to myself, what self-respecting homeowner doesn't have a ladder, whatever. And then I said, well, you look like an able-bodied fella. Will you climb that tree? And he said, sure. And he climbed the tree and he gave us the kitten. And that kitten now belongs to Virginia. That's Virginia's kitty. That's Max. But I'm aware of the fear and the fear that I have and the fear that others have and the fear that we have of each other. And I don't remember it always being this way. I just don't. I remember a better time and a better world. And I want to be the Good Samaritan. I want all of us to be the Good Samaritan. And I want to believe that the people that I encounter everywhere are also the Good Samaritan. But if we're being honest with ourselves, sometimes we're the priest or the Levite. And I really, really hope that we can get back to a place where that changes. I don't know what is going to happen next. I don't know what the outcome will be. And the unknowing and this lack of this feeling of that we don't control it is a big part of why we're all so stressed out. And I'm clinging stubbornly. I refuse to let it go. I have believed all my life that most human beings, all human beings at their core are good and reasonable. And I refuse to let go of my conviction that good always conquers evil. No matter how long the arc, no matter how hard the battle, good always wins. I refuse not to believe that. I believe also, I really do believe, and I felt it for a while, that we are standing on the precipice of a new era. I really believe it. I believe that we have a chance, and it's not just this election, it's so many other factors. I believe that we have the opportunity to call forth and unfold a period of history where the greater good is the focus and all people have the right and the resources that they need to thrive. I believe we are on that edge, and I believe that it is possible to bring that world into existence. Change comes with resistance. Change comes with backlash when people begin to feel like they are losing their grip on the top of the hierarchy. When they see all of this change and all of this difference, it scares them. It scares them, and it causes them to act violently out of fear. Those who engage in political violence do so because they know they are losing. They are losing. They're losing. And we're not, just like Michael said, we're not going to roll over. We're not going to let them take this country from us. I expect, and I think we should be prepared for, political violence following this year's election. I pray that the US government is prepared and aware. I expect that it's possible that things will get worse before they get better. I think that is certainly possible. But I refuse, and we should all refuse, to let fear control us. We're not making choices out of fear. We're not making plans out of fear. We're not going to let fear control us. No matter what happens, we have each other. Whatever is coming, we'll face it together. We will keep our eyes steadfastly cast on a brighter future that we are calling into being. And most of all, and I want you to hear me and believe me, I believe we are going to win. We must believe that we are going to win. And we must do all we can to make it so. May it be so, because we make it so. Amen and blessed be.